Now that was a superb bit of scoring, Jason. Of course, there's me. I'm going to be commenting on a lot of things, but your attention to details, like marking entrances and balancing things, and there's just so many cool things about this. You really have thought things out. Now, having said that, I will notice that this is the third score that I've looked at today that has both a an extended celesta part and the addition of alto flute. Right, so it's kind of interesting. It's just complete luck of the draw. Sometimes these things happen. All these entries are in order that I received them, except for like not kind of separating out the different categories. But of all the scores I received in this category, this is the order that I received them in, and this is the day that I am looking at all of them and giving you my final thoughts. So that's kind of an interesting thing. So yeah, just a really enjoyable, lovely, lovely score. Let's um, let's start here at the beginning. Actually, I'm going to sort of back up a little teeny bit and just kind of notice that, like, it's interesting how you've got all of your functions assigned here, but then when you go to just a real, kind of almost sword-like tenuto here, zoom, 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 zoom. So, like, I feel that this is the place where it is time for the Shire folk of the lower winds to rise and be part of the action. So, like, all of these instruments are like not being used. They could have thickened this and just really made it stand out against the brass, right? You're saying gradually getting tenuto, getting more tenuto, I think, or gradually getting. Yeah. Anyways, it reminds me of the Bruford album, "Gradually Going Tornado," gradually getting tenuto. So yeah, so that's all cool. Yeah, so you're just kind of making the line more and more heavy. Okay, all right. So yeah. Aside from that comment, this is very cool. Fading away. I think you should tell us how far down you're fading to, right? Because like back here, let's go back even further. We had some forte marks here. I think that I think your winds could easily have gone up to fortissimo. I mean, I know you're sort of trying to keep them from overwhelming the melody, but like they were kind of hard to hear. Yeah, so forte or fortissimo, who knows, fading down to piano. So you gave your diminuendo like a destination here, but you didn't for everybody else. So you need to tell everybody else just how soft they're getting, how far down they're fading away to, like maybe a pianissimo or something. All right. Now there's like a kind of a strange thing about your mock-up. All right, and that is that your tenuto articulations are playing back as tenuto staccato, almost a portato, but not quite. So it's really going unga unga unga, and that's really not how things would be going. Like if you're like think zoom, right? When you're looking at a string tenutos, you know, zoom zoom zoom, right? It just really is like you're using a lot of bow, just like in a just absolute full all the way through the note, right? Zoom 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 zoom, right? Not So if you want unga unga unga, then that's a tenuta staccato. If you want that is portato, right? So it's just like halfway in between those. It's almost as if I don't know. Maybe you were able to adjust that in the mock-up. I'm assuming this is Dorico, so I guess maybe you were able to get in there with the mock-up and sort of adjust the articulation a little bit. So if you were doing that, then that's what it means, right? But if this is what the mock-up is naturally generating, there's a problem, right? Because that's not tenuto, right? The separation between, like, if all of these were eighth notes with eighth rests in between them, then it would sort of be like that. But I would still have a problem with it. All right, so let's look at the actual, parts of the scoring. Very cool to have contrabassoon and celesta so far apart. Um, 5 octaves, is that right? I'm looking at my keyboard. So yeah, so stacked up. Yeah, 5 octaves away. So yeah, that's so cool. And then and then leading off from it, you have a lot of handoffs rather than dovetailing. I'm sort of trying to develop a vocabulary around that where we can, and I get it wrong too. I think I said a few. I think I said a few things. I said use the word handoff when I meant dovetail. So a handoff is like this right here, where a completely separate instrument changes over to another instrument or a phrase. They share a phrase, but the changeover is absolutely complete. There's no dovetailing, right? So here we have a handoff, right? So yeah, but I mean, not always. Here you are dovetailing with the bass clarinet and the bassoon. I mean, you're still hanging on to this note, but it's dovetailing out of it. Yeah, so some nice grumbly low winds in here. And I like how you just sort of like hang on to certain things in the strings, touch certain points. I think that there are a few moments like that earlier in the score. And this is interesting. You go to like all strings, right? And you keep the melody up front. And I mean, it really seems as if you watched my Pitfalls video with due diligence, because you're using a lot of things that I mention in there. All right. So yeah. So I feel this all works pretty well. Right, and then here I love the shift of color. Bum 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 bum, where you bring in the English horn on the top note. Right. Da 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 dum, right here. This is so cool. Bassoon, and cellos in unison after a little bit of horn came in with color right in there. Yeah, and here you don't overdo the implied leap, but it's still there. It's really, really nicely done. Yeah. Now here you come in with your alto flute solo. So badass. Now, here what I would say is that things are going to balance sort of, right? It's still a much weaker tone up here. I mean, you could almost go up to mezzo forte, I'd say. And I would possibly cut this. Maybe the winds could play pianissimo. The other winds, or maybe you could. Yeah, so maybe go up to mezzo forte and then down to mezzo piano or even piano here. But maybe cut the crescendo here, or really like separate these two parts by one more degree. The celeste is fine though, really nicely done. Yeah, beautiful color right in there, and then just. Solo. The word solo would go up here, right? All right, so it's you're sort of bringing this out. You don't really need to do that. We'll remember that it's alto flute. Okay, everybody will see that that's alto flute. You just basically just say solo here. I don't recall. Oh, I see piccolo. I see. Okay, 2 alto flute. Yeah, all good. All right. Yeah, and nice. That beautiful color, slightly grainy in the middle register. And then trading off to clarinet and then bass clarinet. These all could have dovetailed, and I think they would sound absolutely gorgeous. The the alto flute player stepping down, dovetailing into this this note right in here, and so on, just kind of taking us all the way down the scale. This is just gorgeous, the way you slur up rather than down in your bassoon part, obviously, because you can't play G below the lowest B flat. but it feels like it's going down because of all the other instruments. So nice. And here you do a little dynamic mixing and I'll forgive you. This is really great right in here, just a little bit of celesta right at the end. So yeah, I mean, I probably am not going to be spending as much time in this score, like just really breaking things down atomically, because there's so many things that I kind of feel like I don't have to comment on them so much because you got a lot of things right. But just to sort of point things out that really, really work great. Yeah, I love this Doloroso with this absolutely captures exactly what Barvinsky means. He wants it to be really emotional, right there, right. Alrighty, so awesome ending. All right, now back to the start of D. All right, so there's some very enchanting scoring in here. There are a few flies in the ointment for me. One is that you don't have a bass tuba, right, or a tuba part in here. And you have this very pronounced part, very essential part, right in here, bass clarinet, bassoons, and so on and so forth. That really, could you hear them in the mock-up? I couldn't, right? And so, I think that this line needs some support from tuba. I don't know how you would add it, maybe from an octave below, or maybe there could be some way of adding some kind of force in there. But yeah, just like the whole idea of these rising lines, you have chosen to take your trombones basically and not play the arc that is in the original, not transcribe the arc. So there's a sort of a kind of a transcription of or adaptation of it in the bassoons. So yeah, I mean, this is really where you need some support from just a really fat, raspy, booming kind of bottom end instrument in order to express some of the arc, even if it obscures it slightly, it would still it could still all add together. And then another thing is these tempos. All right, you're saying poco a poco maestoso, so more and more majestically. All right, and it just really feels slow. And then you go poco allargando, just really driving that out. Dun, 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 dun. And then we rage into this next part, con fuoco. So, I mean, with fire. But I mean, I don't really, I mean, it just feels so slow, right? But I mean, you're playing these ripping lines, so, yeah, but once again, they're a little too soft to hear, right? So I mean, I have a bunch of things to say about a bunch of different things. I'm not saying that this does or doesn't work or whatever. I think that it's really cool myself, but you didn't need me to tell you that you're a genius, right? You need me to tell you how you could improve or not improve, but how you could make what you got even better, right? Like your conception. That's what I really like to focus on. I don't like to say well, you should have done this, you should have done that. It doesn't work because X, Y, Z. I'd rather say, does if a combination of approaches doesn't add up, then I'll mention it. But I'm not going to go after the approaches themselves. We'll just see how much we can make work out of what you have added. All right. So when you start off here. Timpani and bass trombone, this is kind of an interesting thing. You have real sostenuto here on your timpani note. Now, if you're going to have a low brass or low wind double the timpani and play an extended note after, on the same exact pitch, you don't need sostenuto on the timpani stroke. Right? It'd be better for you just to mark this, just to have a thump on a dotted quarter note and then just leave off because it's superfluous. The sound of the bass trombone here is going to completely devour any kind of sustain that timpani note has got, right? Now, maybe you're a timpanist, maybe you disagree with me, I don't know, but The sustain is going to last about like maybe to the beginning of the or the sorry to the end of the tie, and maybe just like an eighth or maybe possibly a slightly. I mean, to the timpanist they'll be able to hear it, but yeah, it's going to decay really quickly, and the other instrument that is playing the same exact note is basically going to absorb all of the sustain anyway, right? So, all right. Now here's the problem with this approach. Like, so you start off, and it's a cool idea. Celesta doing the cascading octaves and the double basses responding, right? Okay, it's really, really stripped down. I mean, we've seen some entries where the cascading octaves are just monumentally scored, right? Some might think they're possibly overscored. I don't agree. I think, I think that I mean, I attacked the problem in a similar way. I really did try to get a lot of weight onto those octaves. But here's the thing. You may start off beautifully balanced with the celesta sort of cascading downwards, sort of like silver raindrops, and the pizzicato. There isn't really a big connection between these two because they're so far apart in pitch, right? We're talking about F sharp, this sounding F sharp below middle C, and then this F sharp here is the octave above the note that's written, right? So octave below the note that's written, octave above the note that's written. So it cannot be trading off in any way, shape, or form. They're 2 octaves apart, right? Because of the opposite octave transpositions. All good, though. It's fine. The problem is sempre crescendo, right? I'm really not I'm not a big fan of sempre crescendo here. I think that's more of a pianistic thing, really, in the context of how... It doesn't mean you should never use sempre crescendo in an orchestral piece, but I think that the context of this marking in the original source thing is more of a pianistic thing. I think poco a poco crescendo is... why don't we use sempre crescendo in everywhere instead of poco a poco crescendo, right? It's just because poco a poco crescendo is more accurate. So I would say poco a poco crescendo, and then... and make sure that you have a destination dynamic for it, right? All right, so the problem is, by the time you get to a right around mezzo forte, mezzo piano, mezzo forte, the celesta is basically just being obliterated. Like death by 1,000 cuts, just death by 1,000 milliseconds, right? With every new beat to the bar, more and more celesta is going to get devoured by the growing urgency of all the other parts, and the cascading is just going to, you basically just kind of lose the cascading, right? So what is the answer here? Well, I don't know. That's up to you, but like maybe you could start adding more bits and pieces to it, right? Just kind of, so you don't have a harp part, right? I was just checking. I did not remember a harp part, so I was just checking to make sure that I got it right. So so like you've got nothing you can use to thicken that up, right? So I mean, there's places where you could have used harp in this. There's definitely places where you could have used tuba. So leaving out those instruments, maybe, All right. So aside from that, nicely scored. This is just basically a transcription of the original score, but like slightly rearranged, right? So we've got the octaves, like instead of the octaves like from with the harmony below them, you have sort of interlocked the harmony in between the octaves, right? So instead of an F sharp third, we've got an A sixth, right, with the second violins covering that. So it actually works pretty well. So like I'm not going to complain about it. And so long as you are writing the F sharp below, like we've got that sort of pedal tone, then everything is fine. And I really love how you come in on the second beat. Don't get confused. Like in a bar of 12/8, I mean technically you have 12 beats in a bar of 12/8, but the actual beat of the baton, there are going to only be 4 of them, but from the conductor usually, unless like the tempo is incredibly slow. Boy, I remember learning to beat compound time back in sight singing class, of all things. We learned how to conduct in sight singing class. It was awesome. Great teacher. He had an enormous oil painting of Frank Zappa in his office that told you absolutely everything you needed to know about him, almost. All right. Trumpet solo, right? There was a mute, so you're saying open here. And then you add the octaves. And it's all just really gorgeous, like how simple this is. So if you could just like, beef up your silver raindrops a little bit, right? So that it just more naturally goes to this point. See, the other thing is, poco a poco maestoso, what all this is doing, in my view, is it is disconnecting this section from this section. Remember how I said I would talk about if things don't quite follow each other? The reason why is that, like, without any urgency, just becoming more and more majestic, that almost begs the question of why this isn't more of a majestic build. You're saying more and more majestic, but we're not really using, we're not bringing out, the 11 lords a leaping and, the 12 ladies dancing, right? Where is the court, right? Of His Majesty, who hits us right about here, right? There's not enough of a procession to justify the slower tempo approach here, I feel, building up to it. But then of course you have the opposite problem, which is like, well, if I make it too majestic going into this, then it just sort of spoils the effect of this huge tutti going on and on and on, right? How long can I go on with that at a slower tempo? And maybe that's the answer right there. Maybe you don't need to get poco a poco maestoso. Maybe you need to get more and more urgent, right? Yeah. Yeah, I mean, this piece is kind of heartbreaking, isn't it? I mean, like, when you really get into, like, what is it saying to an 18-year-old Barvinsky? I mean, somebody could write a paper on it, or a book about his life and about his early life, which also had qualities of tragedy and, just like the whole situation of everything that was going on, not just with him, but with, with his country, with his expectations of, all that other stuff. All right. So, so you just kind of get the angst in here. Just, it is really his best early work out of all his 6 preludes and his other works. It just has the most sweep. And I love the sweep, speaking of which. Like how you're really preparing us for this, the kind of the barking triplets, right? I love it. It's, that I don't have a big problem with. And I also like this kind of overstressed, dun, dun, dun. Once again, unga, 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 right? If this were really honest to goodness tenutos here, especially in the strings, they would not be separated. It would be yeah, 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 yeah. It would just really be, zoom, 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 like really long bows, long direct bows on these, right? And the same thing on the these would be nice, long, blocky breaths rather than shaped articulations, right? So it would be bum, 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 right? Rather than dun, dun, dun. That bounce, that's where the staccato is, right? Okay, and then, marcato accents on your bass clarinet. That's some awesome stuff, along with the bass trombone and so on. I love the way that you've set up the rhythmic pulse here. Just so awesome. And all this tripleting around right in here, just really kind of giving some shape and some reinterpretation to the left hand for those last 4 bars before it kind of gets into the insane section that we're about to look at. So, just really nicely done, and respecting the overall harmony. Once again, marcato accents and the double basses, so cool. yeah, I feel that the pulse works great here. And then of course, like how you got these beautiful spread out trumpets, right? I will say one thing, hitting this high C right in here, there's a limited amount of those that the player can play, right? And they are going to scream, right? You might get about maybe 6 to 8 good high Cs, and a few strained ones and maybe a couple of cracked ones, right? It just depends on how many times you can send players up there and using up their lip, right? Like imagine like if this were reversed. Imagine like you had something big like this really high playing, and then you asked your player to play this kind of nice soft solo right in here. Right? It's the same danger that horns go to. You ask them to play a bunch of their high Cs, high written Cs, sounding F at the top of the treble staff in concert pitch. And and then you ask them to play something sweet and low, right? It's very tough. But I mean, a pro should be able to do it. But the thing is, it's just like it's kind of like saying, well, a pro valet for His Royal Majesty should be able, should be able to remain working at their job even if the king slaps them in the face. But is it good to slap the valet in the face? No, it's not a good thing. All right. All right. So oboe. Just want to check something here. Yeah. So you just have a single oboe. That's right. Yeah. I just have so many details in my head. I'm trying to remember different bits and pieces that I'm forgetting some basic things. Apologies. All right. Suspended cymbal. Mallets. What kind of mallets? Soft. You want soft yarn, hard rubber, medium rubber. I love medium rubber on tom-toms. Man, that is one of my favorite sounds. Oh, it just has the coolest sound. I actually used it in the show that I just did. So yeah, just tell us what weight, right? Soft, medium, hard, rubber, yarn, Sometimes, like if you don't say anything for snare drum, then it's just assumed that you mean snare sticks. But you can actually, differentiate between light and heavy sticks too. I specifically asked for light sticks for the cymbal part. We should do a study of those arrangements because everything is going to be public. I think you'll be able to listen to it on Radio New Zealand, and like the whole concert or all the different numbers we played, they were recorded professionally, and we can pick them apart and look at them, and we could really get into the DNA of what makes a good crossover score. Hopefully, you will consider them to be good. I did. All right, so isn't it interesting how these rips up get a little swallowed by the crescendos in the horns and trumpets, right, and trombones to a certain degree. All right, so where is you would think that this would come out more, but it's the mock-up really. In a live situation, this will come through more. It'll still get a little eaten up, but just watch out. It's because of the depth at which you start before you rip upwards, right? So if you started a little bit higher and went a little higher, then I think that you would hear these more. All right, so now we get to the good stuff. All right, so what I want to say about this, Jason, is that this is just a really beautiful, furious kind of a thing. And here you're saying con fuoco, right? But I would associate con fuoco with, a kind of a furious pace, right? It's not just fiery. It's also like, it's frantic. It's frenetic. There's just a great deal of energy being expended, right? So all right, so I love the shape of this. What I worry about is that after the third bar, it starts to sort of set up a pulse, right? It's the same approach. It's not the same notes in every bar. You just went to such pains here to work out certain tunings and so on with certain parts. And that's all great, okay? But I feel that they're like, it's too ordered, right? It is supposed to, it's like the swirling chaos, right? Except the chaos is orderly. After a while we start to see the pattern in the chaos, right? And then after a while it's just kind of, more of the same. And then here I really loved how you started to break this up with trills and things like that. So is it possible to like maybe reshape this so that it isn't, so that it's more randomized, right? And I'm one to talk because I did something not the same as this, but I had, some wild flurries and so on. And, I probably could have been more random with them too. So I'm kind of thinking back. And right, like right in here's boy would a tuba come in handy here for pushing the arcs that you've got in these lower winds, just to really get more guts in there. Because if you're not going to use your trombones to go yup up 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 up, if you're not going to use them to interpret the arcs that are that are inherent in the sort of slightly interrupted and chopped up left hand part in the middle staff, then you might have to it might have to add a little bit more weight to whatever it is that is sort of interpreting that, right? This is also cool in here. Snare drum. Yeah, and then the timpani responding. It's wonderful. A conversation. The cymbal pushing into the... Yeah, that's also cool. One thing I would say here is that, like, if this is going faster, like, in fact, faster and faster, then, like, to a certain degree, like, it's better just to indicate the length of time that the cymbal is going to remain sustained, right? Rather than give it the LV kind of a thing, because it may still be, going by the time they get to the roll here, right? If it's going fast enough. Yeah, it's all sort of tricky. All right, and now here you got fortissimo non legato. So yeah, so that is, like, I would say this. That just the intensity of this stack of octaves that you've got in the lower strings and the upper strings, and combined with the just the fatness of the brass here and the kind of rumbling and hissing of your percussion right in here, it all kind of adds up to sort of obscure these winds here. All right. But, other than that, I really don't have any problem with this. I mean, I almost wish, though, that there was some coloring to this rather than just, than both parts just being pure strings, right? Because there's always a danger of the strings being outplayed. Right now, here in your mock-up, apparently not. However, what if it were, right? Sorry, it's one of those annoying things, like where the person like lays out all these logical reasons why not to do something, and then like the hero says, "But what if it does work?" Right? Sorry about that. So yeah, but there is like a chance with this much force, like. So I mean, I just think you're setting up some things here that the conductor will have to balance, right? And then when certain things start to come through more clearly, like these winds right here, like the regularity of them may be something that you'll listen to and say, maybe I should have mixed it up a little bit. All right, so that's what I would recommend, is just see if there's some way that you can, keep things from becoming a regular pattern above, because we have enough regularity here with just these footballs below, and the and the stacked melody here and the strings and so on, and repeated chords here, and so like anything that just sort of brings some freshness into it, because it is a bit ponderous after all, right? I mean, look, he's an 18-year-old composer, judging by the standards of that time and the the scope of music in that entire region, a pretty damn smart, pretty creative composer. Yeah. It's like I always hesitate to use the word genius, right? Because, I almost feel like a genius should only be given to somebody who comes up with something that hasn't been done before and exploits it in a way, or explores it in a way that makes it possible for everybody else to use it almost, right? Yeah, but I mean that some people say like, oh, making the complicated seem simple is what genius means. Or there's a bunch of different explanations. Yeah, and so I mean, those are my thoughts. I don't think there's much else that I could say in terms of making it clearer. So yeah, so that I think that pretty much covers section D. All right. So, but like once again, it's just I love. I mean, yeah, it is. You say con fuoco, I almost feel like it's like furioso or something like that. But yeah, if you do speed it up, then you have to worry about like velocity, just the sheer velocity of these parts for the wind players, right? They're not, after a while, you don't want to just write a concerto for your players that of, an 11 bar concerto. And now back to the beginning. Just so many fun things in here. There's some resonances with some of my scoring in my version, and yeah, I mean that, and like there's some of it's like some of the best parts I think of the entire orchestration start around here, like continuing on into here. I just love the way that you balance the different qualities of timbre and the different parts and so on. Not too convinced about this, da 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 kind of thing. I feel that sort of goes against what Barvinsky just wants to get there, right? I'm not sure that he wants to necessarily travel in that way, but I guess like seen as a sort of an extension of of the other parts, right? It's not so bad, but it's just that I think it's just because it's so aggressively calls attention to itself. Yeah, and just really lovely stuff in here. And sort of thinking about this once again, what is a tenuto, right? I think that these would come through way better if they were staccato, right? I mean, just from the way that the mock-up sounds, it just really sounds like a staccato. Yeah, so let's jump back. We'll just like go forward little by little. I mean, if there were any ask I would have in here, it would be, is there some way of progressing the texture, right? Rather than like hitting upon a successful strategy, right? Why take it? Why basically stick with it for for the next 10 bars? Is there some way that we can use moving through texture, like kind of like you do over here? Is there any way that we can use that to tell the story, to tell the emotional story of the prologue a little bit more, right? Because like it's all incredibly charming, but then like after we have had the shift of color with the crescendo, then what is there left to say in this configuration? But I mean, it's all pretty nice. I would probably mark the celesta at like mezzo piano or even mezzo forte to balance with everything else that's going on. So the flute and alto flute parts, yeah, I mean it's all very cool. I like the sort of progression downwards of flute-like texture, right? So like, just pure raw flute above, and then the slightly grainier sound of the alto flute below that, and then the compromising texture of the English horn in its middle register, which can have some qualities of flute in it, but is essentially a double reed instrument, and then just pure tenor double reed. So it's a beautiful combination. It's sort of like kind of shifting shades of gray, or shades of like maybe shifting from like green to chartreuse or something like that, like as it goes down the chord, the voicing. But yeah, just really lovely. And I mean, I love the simplicity though. Like, don't get me wrong, like lacking the progression of texture is not necessarily a bad thing or a fatal error or anything like that. It's just kind of one of those criteria that I set for myself, and I felt was something that was worth commenting about, whether or not an entry would do that, right? Because like the risk is that at the speed, the slower speed that we're taking it, and of course the slower speed that you yourself have chosen for the whole piece, right? Just in over having no big speed ups in the middle, is there a chance that cumulatively this will feel like it's somewhat static, right? Because there isn't any shifting of color, or there isn't any motion away from or back to, right? I mean, the color does get denser here as you bring in oboe and first clarinet and so on, and that's all beautiful. And I love this little solo here at the end. Yeah, I mean it's pretty nice. This is a little strange. Crescendo, hairpin, and then a dim mark. Right. So perhaps leftover artifacts from the piano score. Yeah, which also has a crescendo in it, right? Look, just really make sure that you mark like your dynamics are rational, right? Like that the things that you add yourself, the things that you take from the piano score, like kind of all make sense to an orchestral musician, right? So here you have piano crescendo hairpins. This like you're adding the dynamic because of the entrance of the new instrument. Okay, that's all good. We're coming back to a piano. We're going crescendo and then piano, and like crescendo to like crescendo across a beat and a half, or it's not a beat and a half. It is a beat. According to the baton of a conductor. So I like the way you're sort of separating these phrases, but I'm not so sure about this. Da 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 da. It feels a little affected, right? Some of these others, I can see the break, right, which kind of gives you like you're breaking while the other one is slurring and so on. But I think right in here it just feels like I don't really feel the reason for it musically. Then slurring over the repeated notes. Yeah, I've already talked about that too much. My thoughts about that. But yeah. But yeah, it's obviously it is affecting the ability for these instruments to play like a nice clear dotted rhythm. Da 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 da. Right? We're not really hearing that because it's all sort of smoothed out and sort of amorphous. Okay, so now getting into this next part. We've got alto flute and English horn in octaves, which is an interesting sound. Always the risk that the English horn will play twice as loud as the alto flute, and putting the alto flute in a higher register does not necessarily make it all that much louder. But this is an intriguing combination. The God's honest truth is that if this were, it would be a much more secure combination were this in first flute, right? And then you could just add a second flute, and then you could add alto flute here. Like that would be the most secure combination throughout, just kind of adding weight. However, I mean, it is an intriguing combination. I would be almost tempted to mark the English horn part piano, right? And just leave the alto flute part mezzo piano. And then I think you'd get more of a balance there. Yeah, and just little grunty contrabassoon stuff, smoothly combining with the double bass down there. Actually, speaking of smooth, like I was pleasantly surprised at how smooth the contraforte was. Yeah, just I mean, in a lot of ways, it felt like a different instrument from a bassoon, and the nuance of that it was capable of was just so different. There was a lot of discussion about whether or not it was a instrument that should be used and so on and so forth. I mean, I sort of felt, with all respect to some people who were objecting to its very existence, it seemed almost that I think real experience with that particular instrument, like with a player who has been working with the instrument for years, right? Like at this point, I think that player has been playing it for maybe 4 or 5 years, and he can get those. I mean, it's just the color shadings and yeah, are just amazing. So I mean, I could imagine him playing this low D and just really just getting an absolutely beautiful, subtle combination that wasn't like, wasn't like a yak bellowing. All right, so timpani. This is kind of a cool, this thump, 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 this kind of, fate knocks on the door kind of thing. Very, very cool. And then the combination of strings and lower winds, brass, or sorry, bassoons, I meant to say. Yeah, and just really, really nice stuff right in here. The slow accumulation of texture that is just beautifully done, and it's like, it is deliberately going towards a specific kind of color, right? Which sort of culminates right here, right? And then contrasts, right, with certain parts pushing forward and then other parts sort of taking over in a softer way. I feel it's just beautifully successful here, and it's good that you're not giving the alto flute anything that is necessarily exposed and or crucial, right? It's like where everybody's depending on them. But I would say that, like, I would rather have the alto flute holding the G and A2 flutes here, like standard flutes, because we already have the extended G here. Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's really cool. And just this sort of flapping back and forth with oboe and bass clarinet, and yeah, it's just really, really lovely scoring. This is really my favorite part right in here. And then the way that you set everything up for a little bit of alto flute and harp working together. Now here you say solo for your celesta. Sorry, I meant to say celesta, not harp, just a second ago. So here you have your celesta solo, all right, and like the funny thing is that the alto flute part really sounds more like a solo, right? And then you have your strings come in here and they play this, and this is all really, really gorgeous, but the flutes are going to win this battle, right? They really are. And speaking of like winning battles, right? I feel that, like, boosting the alto flute here so that it is a better blend with the strings is a great idea, but like not such a great idea for everybody else when you're adding more and more tone weight, right? So like it really becomes more of a wind band thing with a little bit of strings in the background, right? You just really are suppressing the strings on behalf of the winds, and the winds do not need it. Better for them to form like a cohesive blend with the strings here, I think, than to stick forward in the texture and have the strings sort of be an afterthought. Yeah, but I mean, just in terms of the sheer scoring in here, it's a good solid transcription. Viola's taking the harmony part and first and seconds and doing the octave melody, and then adding on and adding on and adding on, and then just this lovely idea right in here with the harmony and the clarinets and so on. There's just so many cool ideas here. Yeah, and then okay, so cup mute. I think we already had this discussion in Facebook, possibly, of whether open or closed. A lot of cup mutes have both positions. In fact, like, I worked so much with trumpet players who have like cup mutes that open and close that, like, from my perspective, one that does not open is like kind of unusual, right? But all the same, like, yeah, just tell me, closed or open. I think it's just the option, and become aware of like what the open cup mute sound is like. It is just it's like the difference between O and E, right? It absolutely, like, in fact, I think I might do a study next of studying the harmonic characteristics of different vowel sounds, because like it's so revealing, and those, like, to a certain extent, certain instruments imitate those vowel sounds more than others, right? And it has to do with like the way that the wave shape is, and ultimately. So we are actually manipulating wave shapes constantly, and just in the terms of speaking, not to mention singing. All right. So, but to just talk about how this is orchestrated, it's great. You don't give us a bass note, right? I'm just seeing a lot of bass notes on the downbeat here, so this is perfect oboe. And I like the way that you say poco più a tempo. I almost feel like it's just like a lot. It's a lot simpler to just say accelerando retardando, because I really love the very free way that the tempo works here in your mock-up. Really nice work. All right. All right, and then you have non-vibrato flute. So is it non-vibrato here when you bring in the second flute? You probably should mention that. Like maybe have second voice flute, second voice, second flute. Yeah. And is non-vibrato the case with the other instruments too? Because it's going to get a little weird if you have like vibrato, like just standard vibrato second flute and alto flute and oboe with a non-vibrato first on top, right? I think they should all match or not. All right, but cool idea. You got your first flute on top there. So like here you say ben cantando, right? Okay, but you have non-vibrato and you have no nuances. So what does this mean? Right? So I think that like what you actually want here is kind of a cooler sound, as this, like you're kind of, you've had all this emotion right in here, and now the C section here, the section C, is like the cool surface, and then like the bubbling restlessness below, right? And the donging of the tubular bells every 3 strokes of the baton, right? I thought that was also cool, just to keep it irregular, right? Or to have sort of a cross rhythm pattern. Yeah, I mean, yeah, okay. Yes, second and fourth. Yeah, okay, all good. Okay, so here you say non-vibrato. So were you intending this solo to be vibrato? Because the standard state, the default state for brass instruments is not to be vibrato, right? So you can, all right, there's vibrato and there's vibrato, right? So there's just the standard perception of the audience listening to brass and clarinets play is that they don't have vibrato, right? But if you were to talk to those players, they might have a very, very slow shaping, it's a very, very, very slow expansion and contraction of the sound a little bit, that is sort of, it's imperceptible to the audience, except if you take it away, then it sounds cold, right? So if that's what you mean, then I would go with you for this. But like standard thing, you just would not even need to say this at all. Okay. All right. And then just adding more and more weight. So, all right. So the big problem here is like, besides not having a destination dynamic between crescendo and diminuendo, like how big do you get? You need to tell us, because you're piling on, like, 1 player, 2 players, 3 players, right? The other problem is that like just adding this mass here, although it's just really gorgeous, like with the flute on top and and these horns and the tubular bells, that just the strength of this resonance is going to get so broad that this will soon disappear, right? So it's almost like, maybe what if you were to like bring in really, really soft pizzicato, doubling most of what's going on in here, and just started off triple P, and then as this grew, everybody got crescendo together, and you just had more and more weight, and then you backed off. And that would keep this from disappearing. It's disappearing in the mock-up. It's going to disappear on stage. Okay? That doesn't always happen. Sometimes the mock-up is a total liar. Is a dirty, rotten liar. But in this case, it's pretty much even more than it is disappearing in the mock-up. It will disappear on stage, I feel. So yeah. Anyway, but such a fun score. I'm just really, this was such a fun day for me. Sitting down with these three scores and getting them all together, and yeah, just super stuff, you guys. Great work, Jason. Really, really enjoyed looking at this. Finally being able to give you my thoughts on it. A little overdue, and I mean, what heights will the next challenge drive you to, or the one after that? Just the rare little jewel that I discovered recently by a composer you would just never imagine, having scored it, having written it. And then our 10th anniversary, wow, like the amount of different things, the different options that you will be available to you to choose, and how interesting your choice will be. I can't wait to find out. Thank you, Jason. I really appreciate it. I appreciate the support and helping me support those players in Ukraine. I'll have an announcement soon about the additional support we were able to add because of continued support last month. Yeah, this has been one of the most special of these challenges for many different reasons. But I've just felt that there's been so much great interaction between our participants and just people out there watching these and enjoying them along with me. There are some people who have not yet participated, but they've told me that they've watched every one of these videos, and that is just amazing. So look, you guys know what to do. Make a comment below. Let Jason know how much you like this score. Any particular suggestions, any insights, any thoughts, any questions. Who knows? Maybe you have a question for Jason about something, So anyway, with all that in mind, I will leave you now. I feel like I did my day's work, and even got a little bit of exercise in there too. And just once again, with thanks to everybody for everything they're doing to make all this possible. See you tomorrow.